All right, so thanks everybody for joining. This is Dorado intro class. We're going to be talking a little bit about Git version control versus GitHub, and then workflow processes using tools like GitHub to understand why it is that you're doing all of these crazy like pull requests, merge the pull request, branching off of things. We're going to talk about all of that tonight. Feel free to shoot off any questions that you have in the chat if you'd like to. If you're more comfortable sharing the question without other people knowing, then you can direct message me in the chat and nobody will see that. And that way I can just address the question. So you would just go to the blue bar next to 2 in the chat option and just change it down to me. Or host, I think might be the other option that it has for you to be able to message me directly. And feel free to unmute and ask any questions too, if you have anything along those lines. I do have sort of a slideshow kind of thing that I'll be doing that hopefully will help give some visuals as well. So I'm going to start sharing that and we'll just go ahead and dive right in. Let's see here. Okay. Is everybody seeing the Git versus GitHub blue screen? Okay, right? You can just do a thumbs up reaction. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Sanzi. Okay, and then I just need to pull my chat back up so that way I can see anybody that is in chat in case any questions come up. All right. Perfect. So Git and GitHub, they have the same, base of word there, but they are two different things. So Git is something that you'll use on your local machine to help with version control. So what is version control? That might be a new concept for for a lot of folks. Excuse me. So I want to start out kind of showing what version control means in a user-friendly way. So for example, for your Cassiopeia mentor session sign-up sheets, those spreadsheets that you all fill out whenever you're signing up for a group session, right? I am pulling that up right now and they have a version history, and not everything has this. So like Word documents, you save your document and it just saves whatever your document is. It doesn't necessarily say, oh, this is what you changed since the last time you hit the save button or anything like that. But for the spreadsheets, for example, and they do have a version history, and I feel like it's a good visual way to kind of wrap your head around what version history is. I just have to remember where it's at. Here we go, version history. Okay. So in our Cassiopeia mentor session spreadsheet, sorry, it always takes a minute for it to load. We currently have, the most recent version that includes, anybody that had signed up for any sessions for the week of November 2nd to 22nd is what I have selected currently. Oh, hold on, still loading more versions, so I was probably going to update it. I think this was the last time I looked at it was on November 8th. Boy, my computer's really tired tonight, guys. Come on, you can do it, Google Sheets. Let's see if it'll behave itself. We're getting there. So anyway, while we're waiting for this to load, you started to see how there were like different dates and times in the little version history. And if I were to click on older ones, then it would show this is what that spreadsheet looked like at that particular point in time. So like if I were to click over here on November 5th, 12:39 and say, that was the time that Mariella had signed up for Peter's session on Thursday. Well, clicking on it, then it would highlight it blue. So that way I'd know, oh, this particular cell was what changed on this version of it. And then somebody else comes on, jumps onto the same spreadsheet, say Elmira goes ahead and jumps on and signs up with Tammy's and say she did that on November 7th. So it records when a change was made, what the changes were made. And it's helpful because if you're coding and say you're going to try something new, your employer says, I want you to add a feature where a person can search all of our blog history and find the article that they're looking for. So you go to try and add this feature to your site, and you're working on it and you're working on it and it's just not working, you need to get back to the point when you knew all of your code was working so that you can try a different method or implement it a different way. So that's where version control really is valuable in programming, is to be able to get back to your last known working copy of your code, so that you're not having to throw it all in the trash and start all the way over from the beginning and rebuild all of your code. Because as you've gathered from by now in class, writing code can be very tedious and long, and making sure that it works is even more tedious. So I'm just gonna, now that I think it's finally loaded and hopefully won't give me any errors, clicking back. So that way you can kind of see the version history in action. So for the November 2nd tab, back on November 5th, then these were the folks that had added, Cynthia had added a couple of sessions. And then let's take a look at November 7th and see what was added there. So of course we still have Cynthia's names because she had added them on November 5th, and now Kenya had added her sessions on November 7th. So it gives you an idea as far as, it keeps a record of what's changed from version to version. Does anybody have any questions about that concept, or sort of what's going on there? Okay, nice. I just want to make sure I gave everybody plenty of time. Okay, so now that we are kind of wrapping our heads around version control, then let's talk a little bit more about how your computer handles version control. So for example, the Word document that I was talking about, you write a Word document and you save it. And let me find one really quick, actually. Documents. Right now I've got my File Explorer up. So File Explorer on PC or Finder on Mac is what most people who haven't done any kind of like computer science education or anything like that are familiar with. Like just your average user that uses a computer, they're more familiar with using something like File Explorer or Finder. And that's how you can say, okay, on my hard drive, I want to find, the files that have my pictures in it or my music files, or I want to go to my desktop and look in a folder that I put on my desktop, that kind of a thing. So it'll show you some information about any of those files. So right now I've got my documents selected, and I've got all of these folders in my documents folder on my hard drive, as well as just sort of some loose files in there. And it'll show the last date that it was modified. Okay, well, let's take a look and see. Okay, here's a study article that I have. Let me just take a look. April 5th, 2020 was the last time it was modified. Wow, that's a really old one. And then let's take a look at its properties and see if we can see any version history there. And of course it opens on the other screen. Here we go. Previous versions, nothing. But I'm sure I must have made changes to this file at some point in time, even if it was just I wrote a paragraph, waited next day I was able to work on another paragraph, that kind of a thing. So that's where version control comes in handy, is it can kind of keep that running tally, right? Okay, so File Explorer we're all familiar with, but a lot of folks that are new to programming or new in our program or just new to technology in general haven't had to use the command prompt before. And the command prompt is a fancier way of talking to your computer. So in File Explorer, right, we can, right click and create a new file, like let's make a new folder in here, or let's create a new Word document or whatever. You can just sort of point and click your way around. And command line is a little tricky for a lot of folks because it's not simple point and click. When it first comes up, it's going to look like this. You all probably have already seen this by this point, as far as working with, your Git commands and things like that. So here I'm in C drive users in the MA More. So I can do that in my File Explorer too. C drive users MA More. And so everything that I can access when I'm in my command prompt at this level is all of these files that are here. So if I wanted to create a new directory, then you can do like the mkdir make directory command to be able to add a new folder in there, right? And then you can also do cd for changing directory. That means, okay, I was in the MA More folder that we see here. Let's say I wanted to go into the desktop after that. So we'll say cd into the desktop. So now it changes my terminal line. So now I'm in the desktop folder. So let's just go ahead and jump into that. And then same kind of thing. Let's say I want to go into my Code the Dream School instructions there. Whoops, if it helps if I get myself on the right spot. So then it's going to be Code the Dream School. So now I'm on that level. It's the same as if I were to double click into that file. And so I've got a bunch of different folders in here of previous classes where I'd, copied repositories to be able to, do various things to edit it or whatever. So it's the same kind of concept as far as whether you're clicking through a file explorer or a finder, or you're using CD to enter in, then what you have before your little blinking cursor in your command line is going to be where you're at within your computer. And so that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind and be aware of whenever you're working, whether you're working in command line or whether you're working in the terminal in Visual Studio Code. Is everybody following along so far? Is there any questions that I can answer up to this point?
How did you open this command prompt window?
Yeah, so if you're on a PC, then command prompt, you can just search for CMD command prompt and you can open that. Excuse me.
Okay.
They have a lot of different terminals like that within your computer, or within your operating system that you can use. There's one that's called like PowerShell. Mac computers, I think, have one with a different name, but I'm not familiar enough with it because I haven't worked with Macs enough to know. But it's the same kind of concept as the terminal in Visual Studio Code. Any other questions so far about like command line, command prompt, command line interfaces, and how it kind of relates to your file explorer as far as that goes? Now the command prompt can't do, like if I wanted to change something in that study Word document that I was showing you in the file explorer, if I wanted to change a paragraph in that file, then command prompt's not going to help me with that. I still need a software program like Microsoft Word to be able to open up that Word document and change the paragraph around. And so that's in essence what any kind of IDE like Visual Studio Code or whatever else you might be using is doing. And there are tons and tons of them out there. When I was first learning to code, then they had us work in the command prompt, and then we would edit our files just in Notepad or in, I think they had one called Brackets, where it was just a very simple text editor file. Let me just open one to kind of give an idea. So like this is a very plain, boring, and you can write your code within here. Like you could create an HTML document and you just have to save it as an HTML document. So that way it knows that all of this plain text that you're writing is supposed to be interpreted as an HTML file in your browser. It's a lot to cover. It's very confusing. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in. But so git is a command that you use to tell your computer, I want this particular version at this point in time saved. And you can use it in your, in your command line, or you can use it in your integrated terminal, whichever works most, whichever's most convenient for you. And so as I was saying, most people are used to working with the point and click version. Command line interface has a little bit more power as far as being able to like create directories, enter into directories, have those directories pushed to your GitHub account, so on and so forth. So it has a little bit more power, but it also has some limitations because you can't change the index.js file directly from your command line. You need some kind of an editor to be able to do that. And again, this just kind of shows the differences between it. So when we were looking at the previous versions of the properties of that particular study Word document file, like I could see when it was last modified, I could take a look at previous versions and there wasn't any previous version history. But with the command line, then you can run git log to be able to see, okay, all of those git commits I did that I was keeping track of my version history, I can look back through and see, okay, first I created the class repo, then I updated the submit introduction, then I was updating further instructions, and then I did a first commit, and then I did a little testing one so I could show you all how we're working with this. So it shows a history of all of the times I said, my code right now as it is, I want you to just sort of remember how it is, so if I need to get back to it, I can. It's almost like using a bookmark. Questions about any of this information so far? Everybody following along okay?
Hey, what are you doing?
So just kind of going over command line interfaces, and then I'm also going to be talking about integrated terminals and how they do a similar kind of thing to your command prompts.
Okay.
So, so as I was saying, Git tracks versions of a folder and its contents, and keeps track of like the revisions of the files and the code. and you can look back for more details. So the git log one line that you've seen in your coding assignments from time to time just shows you sort of a history of all of your commits, all of your, save my code as it is right now notations. And then you can also just run git log. It shows you the full information as far as this was the person who changed that file at that particular time. And these were the notes that they put in. So it just gives a little bit more detail there. So integrated terminals, let me go ahead and pull up Visual Studio Code and kind of show that. Can I do a quick show of hands as far as how many folks are using Visual Studio Code or something similar to Visual Studio Code as far as using an integrated terminal for your work right now? You can either do raise hand or you can do like a thumbs up or any kind of reaction. So I can just kind of get an idea of how many folks are using.
Yeah, I use the VS Code.
Perfect, yeah. And we did have a couple of videos in there, and in case anybody is doing it just straight up with like jumping back and forth to Notepad and using your command line interface, then VS Code might be a little bit easier for you. We've got some videos on your lesson pages that'll help you with like the install and all of that good stuff with it. But so Visual Studio Code, it's a lot. Like anything in technology, I feel like the user interfaces are a lot just because they have so much power and so much that they can do. So you'll have a panel on the side called Explorer, and you'll see it's kind of set up similar to when we were looking at files in the File Explorer and Finder, how you have these little folders, you have these little documents, you can expand your folders to see, okay, what's inside these other folders, that kind of a thing. So it's basically just a File Explorer or a Finder inside your Visual Studio Code, so that way you can see what the different files are. But the great thing is you click on a file, or double click on a file, and it'll open it so that way you can go ahead and edit it there. For folks who aren't using some kind of an IDE, you're probably having to go to Notepad. So let's just take a look at what that process would wind up looking like. All right, so I'm in my desktop, and then I have to go to my Dorado folder. I have so many files on here, guys. I really need to like clean off my hard drive. Code the Dream, Intro to Programming Dorado, and then here's my index HTML file, but I don't want to open it in my browser because I want to change it, so I'm going to have to open it with Notepad or some other editor. And so I just have a little bit of text in there. I don't even have any HTML code in there yet, even though it's an HTML file. And you'd have to make your changes in here and save it, and then you'd have to go to your command line and update it and do all of that. So it's a little cumbersome that you're forever like bouncing back and forth between a text editor or code editor and then your command line, and going back and forth and opening the different files you need to change from a Finder or from a File Explorer. So an IDE basically just kind of puts everything that you need all in one screen, so it's easier to use. So if I need to change something on my index.html file, I double click it, it's there, and I can make whatever kind of changes that I need to it. Index.js file, let's go ahead and make some changes to that. Anything along there. So you can make whatever changes to the files that you need to and save them. As you make changes, you'll probably see little notations that there's something that's been changed. You might see a little white dot if you don't have autosave set up, so that way it knows to save it. Okay, well, what about that command prompt that we're going to use for all of like our git pushes and git pulls and staging and all of that kind of stuff, right? We can go to Terminal and New Terminal, and then as you can see, it's something very familiar. We already have our information as far as we're in the the C drive, users, MA More, desktop. We're in Intro to Programming Dorado folder. So we're in all of the right spots to be able to access the files we need, change the files we need, and then do whatever kind of git status commands or whatever that we need to do. Okay, so for git status, for example. So since I made a change to the content of my index.html file, and since I made a change to my index.js file, and I've got autosave turned on, then doing git status is going to let me know, oh, hey, you changed these two files. When they're red, they're changed, but they haven't been staged for committing. And a good example that that somebody gave me when I was learning as far as what is this whole like adding and staging nonsense. If you've ever worked at a restaurant Usually, you sit at a table or you have people sitting at your table, you take their order, you run the order back to the kitchen so the kitchen knows what to cook up. The kitchen will put the plates up for you. You take the plates over to the table when all their order's ready. So staging is kind of like that. So you've made your changes to your file. You've gotten the order from the table. You take it to the kitchen and you say, yeah, this is everything they want. I've confirmed this is what they want. Go ahead and make it. And so the kitchen makes the food, puts it up in just sort of this holding area to keep the plates warm until you can have the whole order ready for everybody at the table and take it out to them. So when you do your get add, that's the kitchen adding the plates up to the tray where it's nice and warm and keeps all the food hot until you can take it out. And then your get commit is you double checking to make sure that everything that's on the plates matches what the people said they wanted to order. So it's just confirming, okay, yeah, this is everything how it should be. It's how I want it to be in order for everything to be successful for me here. And then your get push is basically taking those plates on out to the table and say, okay, here you go. So it's just another way to kind of wrap your head around like this whole staging and then commit and all of that kind of stuff. Hopefully that was a little helpful and not further confusion for folks. I know sometimes having analogies can be a hit or a miss as far as references go, but
Mary, let's have one quick question.
yeah, absolutely.
Excuse me, I'm under the weather a little bit, but
That's fine.
after you do your get status, I see where it says you could do get add or get commit. Are they the same actions?
They are two different actions. That's a great question. Thank you, Tiffany. So if we do get add, then that's just going to add it to the staging area. And you can then make additional changes to your file like, oh, shoot, hold on, I misspelled my name. It's supposed to have, OHR instead of ORE or something. You can make changes and then we do, sorry, hold on. I'm in the wrong spot. Boy, if I had $1 every time I had my cursor in the wrong spot. Get status again and you'll see, okay, yeah, we did have some things that were saved, but then we changed the file again. So we need to, make sure that we're adding those changes again. And then after you've added the changes that you've done and you do a get status, then you'll see all of the reds turn to green. So it means, okay, these are ready to commit. We've got them added. So that way it knows how they are right now, right after I did my get add. If I were to do a get commit, then it would keep a record of it. So that way we know. And then doing the get log one line will show us that we have it right there in the example during presentation. So that's the changes that I made just now. If we were to look back at further commit history of anything, then it wouldn't have these changes because they didn't exist yet. It's kind of like going back in time. And if you do just a general get log, then it gives you further details as far as, whoops, there we go. Most recent commit, date and time that it was done, who it was that did it, and then the note that they put in with it. Okay. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Good. Okay, let me jump back to my presentation because I feel like I was getting ready to move on to another step and I'm trying to make sure. Okay. Yeah, so the IDE's Visual Studio Code is just a handy way to be able to have everything all in one place. And so I think where a lot of students wind up having so much confusion, especially like from lesson 2.1 on, is there's so many different ways that you can do it. And when you're in those group mentor sessions, you're probably seeing it done multiple ways. And you might even be seeing it done in ways that it's like, well, that doesn't work for me, or that's not how my computer's set up, or I'm not familiar with that. And that can get really overwhelming. That's why it's helpful to kind of, as hard as it is to focus sort of big picture on the concepts, can really help out. And making sure that you feel comfortable in why you're doing what you're doing will help as well. But it can be really tricky because, somebody's using notepads and command line interfaces and you're usually using Visual Studio Code. As you saw, those look very different, but they're both achieving the same thing. Whether you're in your Visual Studio Code making changes here, or you're in a notepad file making your changes on the file here and saving it, they're still changing the content of that particular file. Whether you're using the terminal here to do your get adds and your get commits, or you're using your command prompt to be able to say, okay, this is what I want to do as far as my adds and commits on this folder, like on this particular folder within my machine. then it's doing the same thing. It's saying, all right, Git, I need to know what my code and all of the file contents and everything were like at this particular moment in history. So hopefully that helps clear up a little bit as far as just Git specifically, that it's just version control and it's to be able to save your work where you're at so you can go back to it if you ever need to. Does everybody feel like they're kind of coming away with a okay picture of what we're talking about to this point, or are there any questions out there?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you were entering the Git commands,
Mhm.
like to show what?
Oh, you mean like for the commands in here in the
Yeah.
terminal? Yeah, so each of them have different things, and in your student resources of the learn.codethedream.org site, there should be like a GitHub cheat sheet, I think, that's in there. You can also just Google for GitHub cheat sheets. And the Git commands are you telling your computer what it should do with that data, with those files, with those folders. And the Git commands are very specific as far as what you have to say. So like the git add command says, okay, git add dot means everything that's been changed, go ahead and add everything that's been changed. So when we had first checked the status and they said, oh yeah, there are 2 files that have been modified. When we say git add dot, it means, okay, everything here that you've noted that's been modified since our last version, I want to go ahead and add that to the staging area. And then once we did git add and we check the status again, you'll see changes to be committed. So it's like, okay, all right, now I know that this newer information is going to be what I want to add to my commit. So I have sort of my running tally of working code. Anna, you actually don't need to memorize all of the commands. I know it's really confusing. Eventually you kind of develop a memory for them because you do them so often, but you don't need to memorize any Git commands. There have been tons of times that I'm like, oh, I need to do such and such with how my folders are arranged or how my like which repository in GitHub I'm linking to, because sometimes I have to do work on the Code the Dream School one, sometimes I do work on my own personal one. And so I have to set it up so that it knows that it's going to the right one, either to Code the Dream School or to mine. And so you don't need to memorize any of those. You can always just do Git cheat sheet in Google or wherever, and you'll always find some good ones. I know Atlassian is the one that I'm going to put the link in the chat real quick. That one tends to be a more popular one with a lot of folks, is to use the Atlassian one. And I'll go ahead and actually download it and open it so that way you all can see what it looks like. So this is the Atlassian GitHub cheat sheet that I had just put into the link. So like git init is to be able to create an empty Git repository in a specified directory. Let me find the one that we actually did, git status. So here's the git status one that we just did. Oops, sorry, it's highlighting the wrong things. List which files are staged, unstaged, and untracked. So it lets us know, okay, what files have had any changes to them, and we have not committed them yet. And then the git commit one, oh, that's git commit amend. So it has a bunch of information in there to kind of help. Here are the git logs, the git log one line, and then, oops, sorry. And you can even check like git log of, if you're working with multiple people, you can see, okay, just the commits that were done by this particular person. So it has a lot of your pushes and pulls are there as well too. Has a lot of helpful information and then just little cheat sheets that help kind of get an idea of what's happening there. Oh, here it is, git commit, commit the stage snapshot, but instead of launching a text editor, use messages as the commit messages. So it's just a way to be able to kind of notate what you were doing with your changes that time around. Yes, yeah, Abebe, thank you for asking about if it would be like remote versus local. That is definitely what we're getting into next, because that's where GitHub comes into play. So everything that we've been seeing up to this point with all of our Git commands and everything, that's everything that's happening just on your local computer. So if I were to take a look at my files in my GitHub repository, hold on, which one is it? I only have like 8,000 of these open. Here we go. If I were to take a look at that index.html file, it still only just shows testing. It doesn't have anything else that I had typed in there at all. If we were to take a look at the index.js file, it doesn't have my second line of code where it has my age in there. Nothing has happened in GitHub yet because GitHub is its own separate thing. If any of you have ever saved something to a removable thumb drive, or you've had an external hard drive that you've saved things to, so that way you can take some files over to somebody else's computer, or take them to the library, or take them to like a photo printing place and then get those files off of there to be able to use it. That's the same kind of concept of GitHub. It's a remote way for you to be able to save and back up your information. In addition to having these like Google Drive, or if you use Apple devices, you can save things back up to iCloud. So you can, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Just like that has a backup of all your files and folders, well, GitHub or Bitbucket or companies like that that have this remote option for you to be able to store your folders and files on for your programming is the same thing, but it takes it a step further because it also keeps track of all of that Git version history. So, you take a thumb drive that has a picture on it to a Photoshop and, pull it off of there for them to be able to print that photo. That's just the photo. They wouldn't be able to tell you, like, if you had changed the color on the photo, changed the brightness on the photo, like they just print the photo. But GitHub, Bitbucket, other tools like that, they'll be able to see all of those edit history. So if you say, oh, I wanted the very, very first one before I changed the picture to black and white, then you'd be able to look back through that commit history and see. Yeah, Scott, you've got a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. So like, if I wanted to actually see your page, like if I wanted to see the actual HTML on a browser, how do I do that? Because I tried clicking, where it, I guess, do you copy the code, or do you just?
Yeah, so it can be a little different depending on how your setup is. There
Okay.
are some extensions that you can, if you're using Visual Studio Code, there's some extensions you can add. So that way all you have to do, all you have to do is right click on your HTML file and say open in default browser. For people who are on Mac, I think it has one where it's like live server, open with live server, I think is what it's called. So you click that and it'll go ahead and pull up, okay, whatever I'm working on currently, this is what it looks like in the browser. Sorry, guys, it's really boring and plain. I kept my HTML simple, but it gives you a chance to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not referring to my own code, but if I were to say go onto your
Oh,
page,
sure.
where do I
Yeah.
click to like see the file,
Yeah.
like the HTML render?
And this is where it gets a little interesting because,
Okay.
yeah, so you can also take a look at your different branches. So like when I was doing an example to kind of prep for this a few days ago, then instead of it saying test, then I changed it to testing. And then there was something else that I changed on the lesson 2 branch. Let me see if I can find it. I had added the index.js file to where it was there. If we take a look at like my lesson 1 branch, whoopsies. Oh, I think I deleted that branch. That's why I wound up going into an error there. Yeah, it gave me an error because there was no index.js on lesson 1. So back on let me start over. GitHub interface. So code, the code tab when you're in your GitHub repository, and this is how you'll know this is my repository, Intro to Programming. And it also lets you know, hey, this one was forked from Code the Dream School, Intro to Programming, Dorado. Just so that way, if you quickly needed to get back to the very, very original copy, say we made some changes to instructions or something, then you'd be able to click to be able to get back to it. But when you're in your code for it, then you can take a look at the different branches that you've created. Main is typically your sort of default production branch. So it's, okay, once I know everything's working, I've done my lesson assignment, everything looks good, I know it's functional, nothing's broken, I can see what I expect to see on my web page, then that's when you wind up merging those pull requests into main. But you can always take a look back at your branches to see what was my code like at that particular point in time. So when we click on the lesson 1 branch, I don't have an index.js here. It didn't get deleted. It's not gone. It's just I'm looking at that lesson 1 branch version history where index.js never existed at that point. And then in lesson 2 was where I created it. So that's why all of a sudden I can see it again in lesson 2. And then I had merged my lesson 2 to main. And so it got copied over to main. I will have some visual aids to help this whole flow make a little bit more sense. But that's so to be able to see somebody else's code then, sorry, to get back to what you were asking. If you wanted to see what my main branch looked like running at this particular time, then you can just download the file and then just run the HTML file as if it was your own. You don't necessarily have to clone it or anything like that. When I check students' final projects, and that's what I do, I just download your zip off of your main. And then I take a look at your folder and see, okay, where are your files structured? How does your code look in each of those files? When I run your HTML file in my browser, what does it look like? So you don't, so you don't actually have to like clone and do everything with it. If you want to see a particular structure of code run, then you don't have to actually like clone it locally if you don't want to. You'll
Okay,
only want to clone it if you're going to make edits to it, if you're going to make a copy and change it up. Yeah.
Okay, I just didn't know if there, like I did know that you can download. I didn't know if there was another way outside of downloading, having to download it, that you can actually
They do have a new
run
thing
in the
called
browser.
code spaces in GitHub. I haven't played around with it yet. But they
Okay.
have a feature called code spaces that I think it's just for like people with the teams and some other higher level paid version of GitHub. I don't think it comes with just like the free standard version of GitHub. But it gives you an opportunity to be able to basically run a repo in GitHub
Oh, okay,
space so you can see it live. Yeah.
gotcha.
So there are some cool things that they're coming out with. Okay, so getting back to Abebe's question from the chat as far as remote versus local. So while I'm in Visual Studio Code and I'm editing files here, while I'm in Notepad or text editors and I'm editing files there, then all of that's local. And then when you do git push, then you're pushing it from your local computer, you're pushing it up to your GitHub account. So since I haven't pushed like on Visual Studio Code, these changes that I made as far as testing for the Git presentation and adding that second line of code, I've been doing that while I've been on my lesson 3 branch. You can also see what branch you're on down in the bottom corner of Visual Studio Code too. I don't know that it defaults putting your branch there. So if all you see is just this information that shows you which file you're in your computer, then that's okay. You can always find the information down here. So on this lesson 3 branch, which as you'll notice doesn't exist in GitHub yet because all I have are just, excuse me, I've got the hiccups. All I have is just my main, my lesson 2 and my lesson 1 branches. I haven't pushed lesson 3 yet. That's what we were making changes to and getting ready to add them and stage them and commit them and all of that. So if I were to do git push origin lesson 3, it's going to take it a minute and then it should push it. It's a little weird using these words. So origin is just a nickname. So that way I know, okay, when I want to push to origin, I'm pushing it to MA More Designs Intro to Programming Dorado. That's my own personal GitHub copy of all of my records. I also have one that I have as upstream. So that way, if I needed to make changes to the version that you all see and are working with, then I can change it in Code the Dream School. So you don't have to worry too much about that because usually whatever you link, it defaults it as origin. But if you've ever wondered, like, why am I using the word origin? That's why you're using the word origin, because it's a lot shorter than typing git push https github.com MA More Designs intro to programming dorado.git. So it's just a nice shortcut way of being able to say, this is the repository in my GitHub account that I want all of these files that I just committed to go to. Does that make sense so far? Does anybody have any questions about how it goes from local and then you use the git command to be able to get it from your computer locally up to your GitHub account?
So that means the GitHub is called the remote?
Yes, yeah, GitHub is completely remote. So they have their servers, they keep all of the data that you're pushing up to it on their own records, on their own servers, on their own equipment. So that way you just have a backup. The reason that we have you use GitHub and why it's so helpful in the tech industry is you have multiple people in multiple different places working on the same code base. You know, you have however many thousands of Google employees in different locations around the world working on a particular feature, a particular page, or particular app. And so it's a way for all of those people to be able to have one local source that they can go to and then pull from that and update their code as needed. Great question from Elena. If I delete files from my Visual Studio Code in my computer, all the code will be saved in the Git repository. Yeah, as long as you don't delete those files and then push the change of having deleted those files to your GitHub account, then yes, it'll all be saved. So say during class, your computer completely crashes, it dies, you need a new computer, and you're like, oh my gosh, now I have to start over from scratch. I didn't save anything off of my old computer. What am I going to do? Well, as long as you had everything pushed up to GitHub, then you can go ahead and just start from whatever point you left off at in GitHub and just kind of reinitialize everything on your local computer. You just clone your main and it'll clone all of the work that you did and pushed up to GitHub up to that point. So that's one big takeaway I want you all to take from this meeting is don't ever start from scratch. There's always a way to get back to your last known point of functionality. Don't ever feel like you have to completely delete everything and start over. There's a way to be able to take baby steps and get back to where things were functional and work from there. That was one big takeaway I wanted you all to be aware of. Okay, so let me jump back over to, where was my presentation at? Here we go. Okay. So yeah, it's very confusing because it's like, okay, you can change things in File Explorer, you can change things in Visual Studio Code, and yes, you can actually even change files straight up on your GitHub if need be. So if I wanted to change my index HTML, I've got a little edit button right here, and it'll say, oh, okay, you're going to be making some changes. Do you want to commit it directly to main? Do you want to create a new branch and do your work there? So worst case scenario, like say you're traveling and you don't have access to your local machine, you can make changes to your code directly through GitHub's browser, through the website. But it can also be confusing to have all of those options.
So if
Yeah.
if you make those changes, Mary Alice, will they go and be made on your local computer, or is that still
They
separate?
won't. Yeah.
Okay.
So the changes that you make in GitHub, you'll have to do your git pull origin main on your main locally in order to update it with anything that you changed in GitHub. Or you'd have to, git pull the branch if you decided to do it in a new branch. So if you're making changes in the GitHub browser, yes, be sure that you do a git pull to be able to change it. Yeah, a demonstration, absolutely. Okay, so let's say we're gonna do, okay, here's a second line of content. Okay, we're gonna do this on a new branch just so that way we don't get ourselves completely confused. And we're gonna call this example, just so that way we know what we're doing. Propose changes. Okay, so let's take a look at our code base again. So when we're on main, and we've got our index HTML that we're looking at, it doesn't have that extra line of code because I told it do this on a new branch called example. When we switch to our example branch, that's when we see that second line of content. But we're not going to see any of those changes at all locally. Let me go ahead and I'm going to git checkout, new branch, and we're going to call it example. So that way it'll match the one that we made in GitHub on the website, right? So we're going to git checkout branch example. So now I'm on the example one, and we're going to do git pull origin. Whoops, helps if I spell things right. Git pull origin example. So that way we know we're pulling from that example branch I made on the GitHub website, and we're pulling it locally to my own computer in the example branch. And so when we hit that, it'll say, okay, it's pulling stuff in. And now when we take a look at our index HTML, hey, look, we've got some second line of content. So something's changed here. And so it alerts you there's something different. Which one do you want to do? And then it tells you what do you want to do? Do you want to accept the current change, which was our old version that just had one line of code? Do I want to accept the incoming change, which has both? Do we want to accept both changes and kind of work it out and make some mishmash hybrid of it? And so for this one, we'll just go ahead and say accept the incoming change. And this is our incoming change, as you see notated here. And now our index HTML matches what we have on the example branch in our GitHub. Okay, hopefully that helped a little bit as far as being able to see what was going on there. But yeah, so it's very confusing to have things kind of operate in so many different ways. So as kind of a review of what we were just talking about. So GitHub will keep all of the files, but it also keeps all the version control history. Let me show you about that really quick too. So if I'm on my main branch, you can take a look at the history here. and it'll show the commit history for that particular file for however long. You can even click on the buttons here to be able to browse the repository at this point. So it didn't have an index.js at this point of the main. So I was able to go back in time, just like we saw on the spreadsheet. I was able to click back on November 5th and Kenya's name wasn't on the list because she hadn't put her name on the list yet, not until November 7th. So this is what my code looked like back on my earlier commit, where all I had was the index.html and I didn't have the index.js yet. I hope I'm not losing anybody. Please feel free to holler out with questions or put them in the chat if anybody's got any questions about kind of what's going on and what's happening and what we're seeing here. Okay, so this was a part we just looked at. Oh, sorry, somebody was about to ask a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so in the terminal, what is there a specific command? I guess you would use the, what is it, git -- online to see which branch you're on, or
yeah, to see your branch. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So to see your branch, you can actually just take a look at the bottom left when you're in Visual Studio Code. If you're in your terminal, like if you're in your command prompt, then there is a git command and I'm trying to remember it. Let me pull up my git cheat sheet again just to remind myself of what it was. To be able to see which branch you're on. You know what? Let's go ahead and Google it because I'm not seeing it quickly enough in my cheat sheet here. Git command to see which branch I'm on. Here we go. Actually, it looks like it's just as simple as git branch, I think. Let's give it a try. Let's see what happens when we do git branch. There we go. Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can just do git branch, and the one that's highlighted and asterisked is going to be the one that you're currently on. And then it'll also show you any other branches that are associated with that particular folder. Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question, Scott. See, y'all are teaching me things. Okay. Never too young to learn. All righty. So let me jump back over to here. Okay, so we were seeing how you can make so many changes. All right, so now let's talk about this workflow that's all kinds of crazy and nutty and confusing. All right, so in lesson 2.1, you initially forked the repository for your class. So we had the Code the Dream School GitHub account. We have your GitHub account. So when you fork it, you're saying, let me take a copy and move it over to my account. And it's automatically going to be on the main branch. So it just makes a copy. And then when you clone it, that's where you're moving it from your GitHub repository that's remote, and you're bringing it into your computer to a main branch. So when you're first setting up and you're forking and cloning a repository, that's what's happening, is you're pulling it from somebody else's account to yours, and then you're pulling it from your account down to your particular computer, so that way you can work on it on your machine specifically. Yes, yeah, I will definitely send the PowerPoint out, Rachel. Thank you. It's been a labor of love making revisions on this from intro class to intro class. So I'm glad it's being helpful so far. Okay. So then you're on your computer and you go ahead and create a new branch of, a new version of your code, lesson 2.1. And I'll talk about why we even do branches in a little bit too. So on my computer, I've got my main branch. I did the git checkout -b lesson 2.1 and created a new branch. And under that new branch, I created index.html. So if I were to switch back and forth between my main branch and my lesson 2.1 branch, when I'm on my main, I'm not going to see the index.html file at all. When I'm on my 2.1, I will, because it's two different versions. It kind of has a fork in the road, and the main version doesn't have a copy of what's going on in the 2.1 version yet. So you do your coding assignment, you stage, you commit, you add, commit, push your changes from 2.1, and you send it on back to your GitHub account. So lesson 2.1 branch, you push it on back and you have it on your lesson 2.1 branch in your GitHub account. So that way you can keep it separate and keep an eye on it and see what's going on. And so at this point, you still don't have an index in either of your mains, whether it's on your local computer or on your GitHub account. But you do have your lesson 2.1 in your local computer, and you have a lesson 2.1 in your GitHub account when you pushed, because it said the copy from my lesson 2.1, make a copy under lesson 2.1 with my GitHub account. All right, so then you do the pull request. And the pull request says, okay, I like everything on 2.1. My reviewer said my code looks good. I'm going to go ahead and update my main branch so that it looks the same, because we want to make sure that the main branch, which will be the final version of your final project, is going to have that index.html file. So you do the pull request. And then when you actually merge that pull request, that's when it makes those two items the same. So it copies over anything that you changed on 2.1, and main branch now has all of those copies there. Everybody following along okay so far? Questions up to this point?
One question. So
Yeah.
technically, after our reviewer checks our initial changes, we're supposed to make the pull request after that.
So it's a little bit different because you're doing like a week-to-week flow. You can merge your pull requests at any point in time that you want to. Reviewers, some of them are like right there as soon as you've submitted your assignment, and they have a really quick turnaround. Some of them are busier. It takes them a little bit longer to do your review. So go ahead and do your merge before you're ready to start the next one. So if I was going to do lesson 3.1 right now and I hadn't heard from my reviewer, go ahead and merge 2.1 to main anyway. So that way I can pull it down to my main, get everything up to date, and then branch off of main into a lesson 3.1 and then continue on from there. So you're kind of building back and forth from one to the other. Yeah, Sanzi, you've got a question. Go ahead.
I'm a bit confused. So I need to merge each branch that I have.
Yeah, but you have to do it in sequence. So if you've done multiple assignments since working in GitHub, then you'll want to merge your first one first. So lesson 2.1, if you still have that pull requests hanging out there and it hasn't been merged, you'll want to merge it. Let me jump back over to here. See how it's got for the example branch and the lesson 3 branch that I've been playing around with during this presentation. It gives me an option to make pull requests for those. So the second lines of code that we made in the index.js file and the second line of code we made in the index.html file, those aren't on main until we say compare and make a pull request. Let's take a look at one of the ones I've closed so you can see. So in my lesson 2 branch was where I created that index.js file. I added an index.js file when I was in lesson 2. And then I went ahead and merged it to main. So that's why on my main, you do see the index.js file, is because I had already merged it and updated it. So when you first are creating a pull request, then it's going to try and have it go back to the Code the Dream School one because we forked it. So always be sure that you change it from the Code the Dream School to your own, because you want your copy to update. The Code the Dream School repository is just sort of the blank workbook that you all copy to work off of and have all those instructions. So if all 60 of you were to do pull requests back to the Code the Dream School one, then everybody, like as we would merge them in, then each person's code would overwrite the last person's code. And so you'd lose your work. And that's why we have you all doing everything just on your account itself instead of doing it back to the Code the Dream School one. So you always want to make sure it goes from your lesson back to your main, and then you do create pull request. And it checks to make sure that everything's good, that you didn't like accidentally delete a line of code that was important or anything like that. If there's any kind of discrepancy, like there's something missing from your lesson 3 branch that was already there in the main branch, then it'll let you know that there's an error. And you'll have to say which copy of those you want to keep. But otherwise, if everything's good to go, then it'll say, okay, there's no conflicts, you can go ahead and merge it. So regardless of whether or not you've gotten review information from your reviewer, then you can always merge your pull request and confirm your merge, and that way it goes ahead and updates it. So now anything that we changed on lesson 3, then we're going to be able to see. So it has testing for the Git presentation. That was one of the changes we made on our lesson 3 branch. And in our index.js, Then we had my age that we had. Well, that's not my age. I wish I was 35 still. It has my age on there as the second line. So those changes are now in our main branch because we did the pull request and we merged that pull request to the main. So kind of going back to our little workflow here, this is the point that we're at. We merged it. And so the lesson 3 branch and the main branch now match. Now, Azia had asked in the chat, so then what about on your computer, the main branch? And that is an excellent question. It still won't know that there's an index HTML on your main branch, right? So the only thing that doesn't look right among all of these, everything's all matchy-matchy except for your main branch locally. So that's why we have you go back to your main branch. So let's, right now we're on example. Let me do git checkout main, and it's probably going to get angry at me because I haven't staged the changes there. Now let me see if it'll let me check out main. Hold on, please commit your changes to stash. Oh, right, sorry. So let me just git commit hold changes. Just so that way I know. Okay, now it'll let me go ahead and git check out main. All right. So here I am on my main locally, and it doesn't have that testing for GitHub presentation here. And it doesn't have my second line of code. So this is where we would want to do our git pull origin main. And now it pulls those copies on down from GitHub into our local computer. Did that help make it make sense, Azia? Okay, hopefully that was helpful. So the git pull origin main is going to say, all right, now that I've got the main branch matching all of my coding assignment homework and I know everything's working, I'm going to go ahead and update it so I can continue on. But why? Why are we doing this? Like, why doesn't it just make more sense to go on your local computer and say, you know what, make my main look like my lesson 2.1 just for my local computer? Why do I have to go through GitHub, right? I mean, who on earth would wonder, like, why would you need to do that? And here's why. Okay, so when you're in the real world working on a team of developers, then you've got a company that owns a primary project repository. And the main branch or the publication branch or whatever that company decides to call it is going to be the code that goes off to the App Store, the code that the user interacts with, the code that gets published on the internet, the website for the company that the person interacts with, whatever it is. And so the end user who's downloading that app and using it, or who's visiting that website, will always see the main publication version of code. And so that branch always has to be kept clean. It always has to be working, functional, no errors. Otherwise, you try and go to a website and you get a 404 error. It can't load the page, or you try and submit the form and it doesn't work. Anytime you've run into any kind of annoying issue with like a grocery store app or a game or a website where something is supposed to work a certain way and it doesn't work how it's supposed to on you, it's because they didn't catch that error and they published it to main, and now you, the end user, are having to interact with that bunch of code that doesn't work properly. So what do they do on the development team? Then you have all these different employees, right? So I've got 4 little example employees at their computers, and they might each have their own GitHub account, or they might have like a professional GitHub account where they're a member of the GitHub company team. And then they usually have multiple branches off to the side, like a development branch or a testing branch. And so all of these employees will pull the publication version, pull whatever is the most recent version of how the code is supposed to look, how the code is supposed to work. And then they'll each have their own little tasks. So maybe employee 1 has to fix the form so that way when the user clicks submit, it doesn't throw an error. Maybe the company redesigned their logo and so they have to update colors and logos. This person has to add a new page to the website. This person has to add a search feature to the website. So they're each working on different things, but those different things might all be impacting the index.html file or the index.js file. And so to keep from somebody updating something here, but then they didn't remember to include this person's changes, then that's why we're kind of having you go through this workflow. Because in a real world environment, you know, employee 1 works on whatever they need to, and they push it to some secondary branch. And then the project manager takes a look at the code that they wrote and make sure that it's not going to break anything before they push it to the main branch that the end user interacts with. So that's why we're having you kind of get used to this flow already, to where you branch off, do your coding assignment that either adds or changes something about the code you wrote last week or all of the code you wrote up until last week. And then you push that branch and then, okay, everything looks good. I know this is functional. I know this is how I want it. Then you can merge it back to main. So at the very, very end of class, then you just need to send us your main repository. You don't need to send us any kind of branches or pull requests or anything like that. Just send us your main repository. And that way we'll be able to see your finished product, and it'll all be on main. It'll be nice and neat and organized. And you'll know that your main is your final draft of your final project. All right, that was a lot of information, guys. So questions, comments, fire them at me. I will hang out here until the last person feels comfortable and we can end the call. So fire away.
Yeah, I have a question about merging.
Yeah.
So could you repeat what merging does? Like automatically tracing the changes?
Yeah, so merging is taking any of the changes that you made in your lesson branch and updating your main branch with those changes. So like when I added my age to that line, then the index.js file in main didn't have that age line of code until I did the merge. So the branch is just a way to kind of keep any new work you're doing separate from your main finished publication branch until you know that everything's good and everything's working how you want it to. And then you can update your main so that way it doesn't cause any errors or issues for anybody that might be interacting with your main branch. Does that help make a little more sense, Sansi?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Other questions out there?
So essentially, when you're working, you always create a separate branch and you don't work off of the main.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And different companies will do things a little bit differently. Like we've had some developers that are like, well, which source, do you want to do an open source model or a closed source model? Some companies will say, okay, I want to keep our company code perfectly clean. And so these individual people have to fork, just like you all did with 2.1, you fork it first, and then you make all of your changes. And then once that's working, then you push it back to them. So there are some different models out there as far as like what workflow makes the most sense for each company. But in general, you usually never do anything directly to the main branch. You always want to branch off, make changes, and then you check those changes against your main to make sure that it's not like the changes you made isn't going to break something that was already working.
Okay. And then when you check it against the main, does it show like any does it show line by line code?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So let me actually go ahead and let me see if I can't cause it to cause a break, so to speak, like intentionally make it. And so when there is an error, then it's called a merge conflict. And that's something that you will get hands-on experience with at the end of the advanced class. So through your advanced class, you'll still be doing the same kind of workflow where you're just keeping within your own code base and you're updating your own code. And so you're not having as many conflict issues that you're running into. But the conflicts usually happen when you have multiple people working on the same code base and somebody forgets to include somebody else's changes that were done right before they started working, or you accidentally deleted something or you intentionally deleted something from your code, but somebody else's branch that they were working on needed to use it. So going back to this example, if employee 2 updates the colors and employee 1 had some inline color styles or something that gets overwritten, then that kind of issue will wind up popping up on a merge conflict. So let me jump back to, to the example and see if I can't cause it to break. All right, so we're gonna edit this and we're gonna change this to this, okay? And then commit directly to the example branch, commit changes, okay. All right, so now if we try and do a compare and pull request, and we want to, again, be sure that you're going from yours. So it's saying I can't automatically merge this. You can still create the pull request, But if I were to try and merge it, it's going to tell me there's an error, there's an issue that needs to be resolved first. And so it walks you through, okay, here's what was on the example branch up here, and then here's what was on the main branch. And it'll say, you need to tell me which version of how you wrote your code that you want me to keep. And again, merge conflicts are a little bit more complicated, and you usually only run into them when you have multiple people working on the same code base. And practicum at the end of advanced classes is where you'll really get a lot of good hands-on practice with handling merge conflicts. But that's a good question to bring up, Scott. Thank you. Any other questions out there?
Yeah, just one other question. What happens if somebody's working on something? I mean, I guess it shouldn't be a problem as long as like GitHub accepts all types of different code and not code, but different languages. So it shouldn't have any issues with, say, somebody working on something completely outside of you know, say JavaScript or HTML or anything like that.
Yeah, it shouldn't be an issue. Basically what it's looking at is it's looking at each character in each file and each line in each file. So regardless of whether you're writing it in Python or C# or JavaScript or, you know, whatever code language you're using to write in, it's just going to compare the files like character by character, line by line. And if there's a differentiation, if there's something that it's like, I was expecting this to be this letter and it's not, then it's going to say, hey, hold on, there's an issue. So like I'd changed my name from Moore to Kent. So it's saying, wait a minute, I was expecting an M and I got a K. Hold on, something's wrong. And it'll tell you, okay, which one do you want to fix? Yeah, that's a great question. All right, well, we've covered everything that I needed and wanted to cover. So anybody that is ready or, you know, feels comfortable and wants to leave, you're welcome to. Thank you so much for joining tonight. I am going to stick around until I either see the last person sign off or until any questions have been answered. And I'll keep recording in case there are any questions that'll be pertinent to everybody else at the end. So thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Really appreciate you stopping by to help make it make sense, and hopefully it was helpful for you all.
Thanks, Mary Alice.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tiffany. Feel better. Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
Good
Have
night.
a good night. Thanks. And for anybody left, if you would feel more comfortable asking a question, or if you need to show me something that is particular just to how your computer's set up or something, then I can always end recording and help you out.